Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Well, for many of us, the past couple of years have reminded us of just how fragile those words are. And I think there's a reason that the free exercise of religion, assembly, and petition was written into the same amendment as the freedom of the press. Well, for Christians, first of all, the first thing we do every day shouldn't be read the news, right? We need to be in the scriptures. But following the Word of God, our dessert should be something that we can trust and something that doesn't waste our time or send us in a wrong direction. And I think Christians and all Americans would benefit from a truly free press like the one our Bill of Rights talks about. Well, in the late 1990s, it took living outside the protection of the First Amendment to underscore its importance for me. I was living in the former Soviet Republic of Belarus, and I was involved in Christian ministry there. And the authoritarian president at the time has been so popular over the past 30 years that he's still in power today. He keeps getting elected, imagine that. And people still keep voting for him. But when I lived there, the free press was a bit of a joke. But there was one paper there that was permitted to criticize the government. It was called the Minsk News, and the paper was printed only in English. People in Belarus don't speak English normally. But they had to print it in Germany, and they flew it in once a week on a Lufthansa flight in these big bales of newspapers, and then they would try to distribute it to the kiosks around the city. And I would run around to the kiosk trying to figure out which ones had it, just so I could read some accurate news. And I think our two panelists today would agree that we're not quite in that situation here in America today, but we are facing some similar challenges in covering and distributing the news that can be trusted. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we are honored to have with us Libby Emmons, who is the editor-in-chief for the Post-Millennial. And if you've been watching the past couple of years, the Post-Millennial has just burst onto the scene. They're doing some big stuff, and we'll talk more about it in a moment. We also have Rob Bluey. He is the Vice President of Communications at the Heritage Foundation and the Executive Editor of the Daily Signal, a news outlet which he helped found a few years ago. So let's talk today. Why don't we start by telling us about your news organizations, a little bit about how many times you publish, how many times you've been banned on Twitter, what kind of stuff you're doing.
My name's Libby Emmons. I'm with the Post-Millennial. We have never been banned on Twitter. We are remarkably careful, and we have never been banned on Twitter. So that's actually pretty impressive. We have been fact-checked multiple times. Usually that has not been deserved, I will say. We have a relatively small staff. I think we're somewhere around 15 people of hardworking writers and reporters and editors. And we're up every day. We run a lot of stories. We run something like 20 stories a day.
Jared, we founded the Daily Signal at the Heritage Foundation in 2014 because, frankly, we thought most media organizations, the corporate media, were doing a fairly poor job. They were failing the American people, and we thought we could do a better job. So we set out to do exactly that. We're unique. We're similar to Washington Stand and FRC in that we are a media organization housed within a larger organization, a policy organization in Washington that's almost 50 years old. And I would say the two things that we try to do each and every day are to put a human face on policy issues. We believe that public policy affects all of you and everyone in this country in profound ways, but too often it's difficult to understand or translate what happens in the halls of Congress for the American people. So we try to do that, get outside of Washington and talk about how those policies have a real impact on people's lives. And secondly, investigative reporting. This year, Heritage launched the Oversight Project, and correspondingly at the Daily Signal, we launched the Investigative Reporting Project, because we feel that there are too few journalists in America who are doing that deep dive and doing the investigative work that we need to expose what's happening in government and to hold them accountable. So we have faced our share of censorship from the big tech platforms for the stories we do, particularly on issues of climate change or cultural issues like transgenderism or marriage life. Those types of things tend to be the ones that irritate the big tech companies more so than others.
Yeah. I will say we're not with any organization. We're entirely independent. So
yeah.
that's a difference.
Well, in highlighting both of those differences, what goes into creating and maintaining, because that's part of it too, an independent news organization, or a news organization that's not part of the big corporate media?
What goes into that?
Yeah.
I would say a lot of hard work goes into that. Being willing to stand up for your values and what you believe in, looking for truth, looking for people who are speaking honestly and reporting things honestly. I think that's the most important thing. We have seen so much of our legacy media has succumbed to their own biases. They routinely discuss how they hate half the American population, which I find pretty upsetting personally, but you can't really let that get in the way of your reporting. You have to be accurate and diligent, and I'd say that's the main thing, is to lean into your own values, lean into honesty in reporting, and work hard at every step of the way to do that.
Yeah, I think credibility goes to the heart of it. I agree with everything you said. And I think another aspect that we try to bring to the conversation is being attached to an organization like Heritage. We have a number of policy experts who know the issues better than most people would. And so for them to help translate that in a way through commentaries, analysis, op-eds, things of that nature, it really is a nice balance to the news reporting that we do. And so when we started the Daily Signal, we built out a team of reporters, people who had a background in journalism or an interest in journalism, and adhering to those things like accuracy and factually reporting the news, making sure that you call and feature different perspectives, even if you don't agree with them. I like Tony's introduction because we don't shy away from the conservative perspective that we bring to the news. We lean into that. And I wish that more media organizations would just be transparent about their own biases and agenda. Unfortunately, they don't.
I think also the journalism industry in the US, it used to be that you would say, you would be transparent about what your outlet was. And now everyone sort of feigns at this objectivism that doesn't actually exist in their pages.
And to your point about who they represent or don't represent, Batya Ungar-Sargon, who's deputy opinion editor at Newsweek, wrote a great book called Big News and Bad News, and it is about how journalists went from really representing the working class of America to representing the elite. And it's where they are trained, so they come from elite institutions or Ivy League colleges, and then they go straight to the newsroom of the New York Times or the Washington Post, and they frankly don't have much interaction or relationship. They're probably not going to church on Sunday, right? They might not even have a family or kids. So the things that everyday Americans are experiencing, living paycheck to paycheck, for instance, they don't have to endure some of those types of things. And I think that that's the detachment that they have with half of the country.
Yeah, I think there is a detachment there, for sure.
Keying in on what you said about credibility, how do smaller startup news outlets build credibility in the environment where you've got these major big fact checkers and other news organizations that are quick to label things as misinformation? You got the big tech platforms. You mention COVID in any kind of article, you're going to get all these other stuff put around it just automatically from. So how do we build credibility where you have just an infrastructure that's already there that's set to discredit?
I think one thing that you can do is look to discredit those fact checkers, look to discredit the people who are labeling you as misinformation. And I think that it's a real testament to alternative media and new media that we've been able to do such a good job of that over the past couple of years. I'm just going to check my notes real quick, and I'll tell you. But if you think about it, we had the Hunter Biden laptop story that was immediately discredited by Twitter and Facebook and the White House and a slew of FBI agents who it later turned out were simply Biden allies. The reporting that the New York Post did on that story was accurate, and it was proved out to be accurate. The New York Times eventually had to give in to that. We saw NPR at the time reporting on why they wouldn't report on that story instead of reporting on that story, and that was absolutely insane. Later, Jack Dorsey had to go before Congress and apologize for having censored the oldest continuously operating New York paper in the entire country, founded by Alexander Hamilton. He had to apologize for that. We had Jen Psaki and the TikTok and Instagram influencer messaging program that she and her department constructed, where they brought TikTokers and Instagram influencers into the White House to give them the messaging that they wanted spread out on these platforms. They did that with COVID. They did that with Ukraine. And all of these little TikTokers and Instagrammers who didn't actually know anything other than how to put on their makeup and get their lighting right, come into the White House and get to hear all of this fake news about what they're supposed to say to the teen viewers on their platforms. The White House had an open line of communication with Facebook and other social media platforms to give them the information that they wanted out there about COVID. This was revealed. There's a lawsuit. There's 700 pages of discovery that me and my team were looking into recently, and it's just on and on of emails between big tech companies and the White House. Well, why don't you, say this instead? Pull that. That's misinformation. And a lot of that stuff was about COVID, and it's kind of proved out. You know what I'm saying? Like, we all know what's going on there. And they were encouraging big tech outlets to censor and suppress average Americans, all of us who were sharing our experiences. Hey, I had this vaccine, I had a bad reaction to it, or whatever issues we were having, that stuff, our personal experiences that we expressed online were being censored. The Department of Justice promised to investigate angry parents at school board meetings using the same tools that they use to investigate domestic terrorism, which they also say is the hugest problem in the country. Meanwhile, you have FBI sources saying, we can't actually find that much domestic terrorism. They keep wanting us to go find it. We don't know where it is. We're not seeing it out there. Angry parents who wanted their kids to be back in school, not masked, and not indoctrinated, they get the DOJ treatment that we're seeing them unleash now on Donald Trump and anybody who ever shook his hand. Then they tell us that there's no such thing as biological sex. They just say this, and we're supposed to believe that that's true. That is an indication. I mean, anybody who tells you that there's no such thing as men and women has absolutely no credibility. So that's the New York Times. That's the Washington Post. That's the New Yorker. That's the White House themselves. Joe Biden came out in April on, I think, Transgender Visibility Awareness Day or some such nonsense thing. And he goes out there and tells parents to affirm your kids. You're so brave. And it's like, he has no idea what he's even saying, right? So this doesn't mean anything. And we're supposed to believe them when they tell us that our daughters and sons can become our sons and daughters. We know that that's a lie, right? We know that that's just setting these kids on a path of misery and destruction and self-harm. But the White House is telling us this. So how do we establish credibility? We point out that these people are beclowning themselves with nonsense and lies, right? We try to listen to our readers. We try to uphold the values, of our readers, which I think are basic fundamental values, holding up the Bill of Rights, which is the most important thing, I believe. And then our readers will let us know. If we're not credible, they will stop reading us. And that would be sad for us, but if they do, we deserve it, So.
The good news is, Jared, the entire list you just went through has real life consequences. Trust in media is at historic lows. I mean, nobody trusts the media. I mean, I don't think anybody in this room trusts the corporate media. Hopefully you trust our organizations and what we deliver on a daily basis. But they have done this to themselves because of what they've pursued. So there's a huge opportunity for outlets like ours to serve the American people in ways that they are, I think, craving news and information. And so that's why we wake up every day and do the jobs that we're trying to do. I think that I'd also add showing up and talking to people about the issues that you care about, not what somebody in Manhattan or in Washington, D.C. necessarily is focused on. And so that's what we are attempting to do. And I know that's what you're both attempting to do. And it can have a profound influence. So I'm really optimistic about what the future holds because there are so many different outlets that exist today as alternatives to those big corporate giants.
Yeah, indeed. Well, what are some advantages that alternative media platforms might have over these established mainstream media?
Well, I mean, look at the stories this week. I mean, the New York Times has 1,300 people who are refusing to go back into the office 2 years after COVID. I mean, now part of that I think has to do with, they've said, this is the same New York Times that says inflation really isn't a problem. So now their employees are saying, well, it costs a lot of money to commute into the office, so we would prefer to stay home. So, I mean, these organizations have become bloated. They've become bureaucratic. I mean, they are infighting within themselves. I think the nimble teams that we have all assembled are able to do things and outmaneuver them in creative ways. I liked what you said about fact-checking the fact-checkers. I mean, we can't be afraid to just sit back and let them bully us. We need to take the fight directly to them. And I think the more that our organizations are able to do that and to tell the stories that they refuse to tell, we're going to start to change the tide and we're going to start to win.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that's true. Being a smaller news outlet, we lack some of the resources that the bigger outlets have in terms of, and you're talking about investigative journalism, we have some, we do some of that as well, but we are smaller. But when you see what the New York Times is doing with their resources, it's kind of like they don't even know what to do with what they have. And we are able to move a lot faster. We're able to get stories out there faster. And also, the other thing that we can do is you can see what the administration and what the far left is trying to peddle. When they report a story, there's an example recently. There was a congressman I was looking at it, congressman in Michigan, I believe, whose neighbor came over and beat him up with a baseball bat. So, or a city councilman rather. So that's not amazing. The way that it was reported, however, was that city councilman may have said the N-word and then his neighbor beat him up with a baseball bat. And I thought, okay, let me look into this, what's going on. The reporting of the N-word happened after the reporting of the baseball bat. So it seemed, it's kind of like you're wondering what is really going on here and why is the main story that one person said something, therefore somebody else was justified to beat them up, whether or not he said it or not. Is that really a justification? So you see stories like this, you can start to dig into them, and what you're also digging into is the way things are being reported. And you can expose the way things are being reported as well. And I think that that's important because for a long time, and this is true with schools as well, we would send our kids to school and we would say, oh, that they have our kids' best interest at heart. They're going to teach them what they need to know, and it's not a big deal, and we'll talk about it after school, but whatever. And we just trusted these institutions. We trusted the colleges. We trusted the teachers' colleges. We trusted the, educational institutions. In some cases, we trusted our churches, and they have let us down. We trusted these big media outlets, and they have let us down. So we have to dig underneath. We have to remember how to think for ourselves. We have to remember how to form our own opinions, evaluate the facts that we see, lean into our values for an understanding of what's right and wrong, and go from there. It's definitely time to stop believing what we're told. Even if it sounds easy and palatable, it's time to really dig underneath that. And that's something that I think alternative media outlets definitely are doing all over the place.
Yes. And I think we do, I think you're both right in that we do have certain advantages. We can do things that they can't do. But there are also limitations that come with it. I mean, we've all spoken about, we have smaller teams. We're not able to cover everything. Now, I don't think the everything that the big media is covering necessarily is worth covering, but we do have limitations. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, it's tough because you make choices every day, right? And in terms of what you assign. I mean, so I would say, looking at the investigative reporting, I mean, this is where I think there's a lot of opportunity simply because people aren't asking questions of government that should be asked. So Fred Lucas, who's the chief of our investigative reporting program, asked the California state government some questions about its jail system and found some alarming statistics about the high percentage of people who were claiming to be female, the biological males who were claiming to be female so that they could be transferred to female prisons, right? That's a story that you're probably not going to find in the Los Angeles Times or other traditional corporate media in California.
Those are insane numbers, though.
Yeah, they are,
they're ridiculous.
And, or my colleague Doug Blair, who showed up at DC Mayor Muriel Bowser's press conference and asked her why her COVID policy, which was going to prevent kids from going to school if they weren't vaccinated, would discriminate against 40% of the black population in Washington, D.C. And it was through actions like that that the D.C. public schools delayed their policy and allowed those kids to go to school. So we can have a real impact. I think that ultimately what it comes down to, particularly for us who are in the nonprofit space, it's about having an impact. We want to achieve a win, and we're not shy about doing that.
Yeah, good. Well, we don't have the government not letting us print our papers. We don't have that issue right now here. We have the First Amendment, but we also have the technocratic overlords. And that, I mean, the distribution channels right now, those are the distribution channels for digital.
Yeah, that's the newsstand.
Digital
yeah.
media. What are some of the particular challenges? I know you said you've never been banned on Twitter, but I mean the specter is out there. I mean what are some of the challenges we're facing there, and how do we work that?
Challenges.
Without giving all our secrets away.
Yeah, I do think that it's challenging, and to a certain extent you have to play within the rules while exposing the fallacy of those rules. And that's something I think that we do really well, and a large part of the reason why we haven't been dinged by Twitter. The fact checkers are pretty fierce, and it's pretty interesting the way that they will come at you. There was something we covered where we said that Joe Biden appeared to be sleeping during a meeting with the Israeli prime minister. We were fact-checked because they said that Biden did not appear to be sleeping. I don't know if any of you saw that meeting. He definitely appeared to be sleeping. And additionally, we were running the story also kind of as a laugh, because here he is. It was ridiculous looking. And so we got fact-checked for that. And when we did issue a correction, but we said, he did appear to be sleeping, which is what we said. We were dinged at one point for talking about a rally that Kamala Harris held where there were 10 people in attendance. And they said, yeah, there were 10 people in attendance, but that's because there are COVID rules in that area. And it's like, yeah, but there was still only, there were 10 people in attendance. That is what we reported.
I was going to say that I think that people need to understand just how this works. Because from what I've observed is essentially Facebook will go out and they will work with the Poynter Institute, which will then credential certain media organizations, which all are on the left, or predominantly on the left, maybe 99%, maybe there's a 1% that's Christian or conservative leaning. And then they will use them to check the facts and then suppress the content from the algorithm and your news feed. So then you will not see us. And as you've already indicated, they are the way that we distribute content. And so the fact checkers have really taken on the role of the censor in today's social media platforms, and it's quite disturbing. What can we do about it? I think we need to just call them out we've had instances where individual colleagues have been banned from Twitter for things that they've said, misgendering or making.
The best one is misgendering Rachel Levine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and then you get dinged for that,
yeah.
and you're like, for real. That's crazy.
Yeah. So, they'll continue to bully, and they're going to start taking it beyond just news organizations and coming after you if they haven't already. So just be aware that that is the next frontier.
There was a fascinating thing recently. I don't know if you all have been following the situation with some of the children's hospitals that it turned out are performing medicalized gender transition for minors. So there was a whole lot of discussion about that. And you had the Washington Post saying that that wasn't real and that it wasn't happening. We had a journalist dig into medical journals, finding case studies of American teens who were minors who underwent really horrific procedures at children's hospitals. The materials on the website for Boston Children's Hospital and others show definitively that not only do they advocate for these surgeries for girls for about 15 years old and for boys, age 17, things like this. This was on their website. They pulled it from their website. You had, instead of mainstream media outlets looking into this and wondering for themselves if this was going on, if it was being funded by insurance companies, if it was being funded by, Medicaid and other things as HHS wants it to be. Instead of looking into that stuff, they started looking into the people who were doing the reporting, saying that these people had, biases against so-called trans kids and all of these other things. And it's just important when you have the facts to stand on your facts, stand on it. Know what you're talking about. Have your information ready. And refuse to back down from something like that. And we did not back down from any of our reporting on that at all.
What would be your best piece of advice for our conservative Christian audience for navigating the news? Do they just not look at any mainstream media altogether? Do they just look at outlets like ours? And if not, how do they navigate that?
I think you should have a balanced media diet. I wouldn't say completely shut it off. Obviously, be skeptical of what you read from the corporate media and on social media, for that matter. I think it's particularly disturbing to see so many young people relying on platforms like TikTok to get all of their news. I mean, I just think if you're a parent or grandparent, talk to your families about different sources, like ours, hopefully. I mean, one action you can take is, support all of our organizations. Sign up for our email newsletter, follow us on social media, donate to FRC, things of that nature that will allow us to continue to grow and do the work we're doing. But ultimately, I think that, it requires each and every one of us to just make sure that when we're consuming the news, we're doing so in a way that helps us really do so with a skeptical eye, particularly if you're hearing things like the list of stories that you went through. I mean, in the last few years, you mentioned Hunter Biden, the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. I mean, how did that perpetuate for so long without other people calling the media out on this? And so we just, as citizens, need to do our part. And one last piece of advice, Jared. The one aspect of media that still does seem to have some credibility and trust are local media. I think it's really important, in your own communities, whether you can get involved yourself or to support them or to hold them accountable, make sure that they're covering things that happen at your school board or your city council. That's ultimately, I think, how we as Christians and conservatives can give back to this country.
I would also say if you're reading something and it seems fishy, it's probably fishy. Use your good sense and take a look for reporting on that same story somewhere else and see what else you might find out.
Yeah, good advice. We each of our news organizations have their own particular niches and audiences. And I think that's a strength. But what are some things we can do? I mean, those are strengths in their own place. But what can we do to work together in a bigger way to promote truth?
I don't know. Promote truth. I think people have to think for themselves and really be open to the idea that what they're being told is incorrect and designed to get them to behave in some certain way. Like if you look at some of the, I'm very interested in energy policy, and if you look at some of the new bills that are being passed regarding energy and how you're supposed to heat your home, how you're supposed to power your car, all of these kinds of things. What is it that the end result is? You know, follow that trail, pull the string, and see what unravels. If you look at now, you have California saying there will be no more gas-powered vehicles after 2035, and then just recently, they told people who own electric vehicles in the state not to charge their cars. So is the end result of pulling gas-powered vehicles to control your freedom of movement? That may not be their intention, but it may as well be, the result. So I'd just try and travel all the way down the path, you know, think logically, think an idea all the way through to its logical conclusion, weigh all the variables and figure it out that way.
Jared, one of the things that we're doing to work together is to promote each other. So we, for years at the Daily Signal, have relied on Tony Perkins and the great team at FRC. We regularly republish a lot of their content because they're covering and reporting on issues that you probably won't see elsewhere. And so we were delighted when you created your alternative media platform. And I think that's part of what we all can do is to share that content with friends and neighbors. Sometimes it'll be a tough conversation that you might have to have with somebody, but I think that to go to your point about the truth, we can't be afraid to engage and have those conversations. We can't be afraid or intimidated by the big tech platforms to share it on our news feeds. And as long as we keep doing that, I think in the end of the day, we're going to win.
Yeah. Well, we all have news to go right, and our time is up, but Rob Bluey, dailysignal.com, Libby Emmons, thepostmillennial.com. If you're not following them, if you're not reading them, you need to be, and as well as the Washington Stand. And thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.